Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that some stories and discussions in this episode of Radiant Resilience may touch on sensitive and potentially triggering topics. These may include themes of medical trauma, caregiving and terminal illness, grief and loss of a parent, emotional and existential distress, mentions of depression and post-traumatic processing. Our goal is to share real-life experiences in a respectful and empathetic manner, offering insights into the complexities of the human spirit and the journey towards resilience. However, we understand that some content might be difficult for listeners. We encourage you to prioritize your well-being and discretion when deciding to listen. Please remember this podcast is not a substitute for professional advice or support. If you find yourself needing assistance, we urge you to seek help from qualified professionals or trusted support systems. Your mental and emotional health is important to us. Thank you for your courage and for joining us in a space of understanding and compassion. Welcome back to Radiant Resilience, everyone. I have here today Andrew Davie. He has worked in theater, finance, and education. He's taught English and creative writing at the middle, high school, and college levels for students with learning differences and ADHD, English as second language learners in the US, abroad in Hong Kong, and in Macau on a Fulbright grant. He has written short stories and novellas, co-hosts a music review show. That sounds interesting. And volunteers. Links are available on his website, which I will link in the show notes. In 2018, he survived a ruptured brain aneurysm and, oh boy, subarachnoid.
That's a difficult subarachnoid.
Okay, cool. I got it. Hemorrhage, which is very interesting, and we will be talking about today. He recently graduated with a clinical mental health counseling degree and consults for James Mason University about brain injury assessments. And before her passing, he cared for his mother while she had ALS. So welcome, Andrew. How are you today?
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I think we have lots of great things to discuss today. Great things and tough things, because that's what we do on this podcast.
Sure.
So I'm going to let you go ahead and start. We mentioned going a bit in chronological order. So wherever you want to start with your story and how you got to where you are today, I'm going to let you go for it.
Sure, thank you. I think the best place probably to start is just before 2018. I had been teaching high school English and writing at an independent school in Virginia, where I was living at the time, for students with ADHD and learning differences. And my first crime fiction book had just been accepted to be published, which had been the I had always had careers that would support me while I worked on my writing career. That was the focal point. So
Okay.
this was suddenly, even though it was an independent small press, this was okay, you've arrived. And then I didn't renew my teaching contract that year,
Okay.
but everything was great. The school summer had just started. It was end of June. I had just turned 40 years old the week before.
Okay.
So I was feeling pretty good. I was going to fly to visit my parents, and I felt fine when I got to the airport. And then when I got to my gate, I started to sweat uncontrollably.
Oh, no.
So, yeah. And again, at the time, though, I'm thinking maybe I'm coming down with the cold or the flu. It was,
Sure, of course.
and this is before COVID. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. And then they called my group to board. And when I tried to lift my bag, it felt like there were cinder blocks in there. And again, two serious red flags together. But at the time, I thought, okay, if I can just get on the plane, I'll take a nap. I'm sure I'll be fine when I land. So I scanned my ticket, started walking along the jetway, and the floor began to shift. Like
Oh,
I was at
geez.
a funhouse at a carnival. And again, I'm not still not thinking clearly, because I thought, how am I going to get enough momentum to propel myself onto the plane?
Oh, man. And I'm sure all you're thinking right then is just, I just got to get on the plane. I just have to sit. And then I'll start to feel better.
That's exactly. And then I fell. Fortunately,
Oh
I fell. I
man.
didn't get on the plane. I fell in the jetway, and I heard someone say, "Don't move." And I thought, okay, I won't move. I did manage to say, I can't miss my flight because I was just worried what my mother might think. So I passed out and was taken to the hospital. Unbeknownst to me, JetBlue had called my parents to let them know that I had missed my flight because I'd filled out the notification
Oh
form.
yeah.
And my brother and his family were already here. It was going to be like a family vacation. So for most of the day or that morning, they just assumed that I missed my flight or that I had something had happened, but no one knew anything.
Oh man. That had to be stressful for your family.
Yeah, I think they were at the time it was still potentially funny. There's got to be a funny explanation for this. And
Yeah.
then my neurosurgeon's physician's assistant found my phone and saw a bunch of missed calls. So he
Mm.
called my brother and said, "No, this is serious. You need to come up to DC." So immediately everyone came up to DC. And I was in intensive care for about 3 weeks, which I have no memory of. But
Oh
I've
wow.
seen some really funny videos of me, and they're funny in hindsight, talking to
Yeah.
people. I'm clearly awake and responsive, but just no memory of it.
Wow.
And then, yeah, I was in the hospital. Once I regained cognizance, I was there for another 10 days doing various therapy. I got discharged. My mother actually stayed with me in my apartment and became my caregiver
Wow.
for about 2 weeks. And then we moved back into my parents' house, where that first year, the first 9 months or so was mostly physical recovering,
Mm.
which happened pretty quickly.
Okay.
I originally had to walk with a cane. I didn't really have much endurance. I got winded really easily. I had double vision, so I
Oh
wore an
wow.
eye patch. Yeah, I missed the eye patch a little bit because I thought it was a cool look.
Sure.
But anyway, that first year hit. I eventually didn't need the cane anymore. And I assumed when I would go back home that I would just basically be returning to my old life.
Oh.
And when I got back home, that's when the emotional recovery started.
And this was
And
a year after then?
this is about towards the end of I think so. My aneurysm happened in June of 2018. So this is probably like January of 2019.
Okay.
And that was much more difficult
Mm.
because it was a lot of existential angst of, okay, what am I going to do? I still have difficulty making emotional connections.
Interesting.
Or so I remember being in New Hampshire with a friend of mine, and we were sitting on this dock at this lake while the sun was setting. And I remember thinking, this is really beautiful and serene. At any moment now, this euphoria is going to hit me. Intellectually, I understand what I'm looking at. This is really wonderful. And any second now, I'm going to feel it. And I never felt it. And I thought that was
Oh,
a great sort of analogy for my predicament.
yeah.
So
Is that common for people who
I,
have
I'm not
aneurysms?
I'm not sure. One thing that I've learned is I'm probably in the 99th percentile in terms of surviving with very limited physical disabilities that usually happen.
Okay.
And there just isn't a lot of research
Mm.
because of that.
Yeah.
So most of what I've just accepted as typical are things that I just assume this is probably what happens. Um,
Yeah.
so that's actually why I went into counseling because I tried to go back to teaching briefly. I was a sub at my old school, and working with that population of students, you need to be at 100%, and I just
Mm.
wasn't at 100%. So
Do they have any idea what caused it?
no, I just am one of the rare. So without scaring any of your listeners, a lot of people will develop aneurysms in their lifetime.
Okay.
They'll
Just
be
randomly.
or just genetically, it's
Okay.
just they won't be fatal at all. They won't be a problem. They'll just have them and won't know about it. My suggestion is if you have a family history, it might be a good idea to go get checked. For me, it was just like getting struck by lightning. And I'm really fortunate that I happen to be out and about in a public place because I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now.
Oh, wow. So you fell on the jet bridge, and then I'm assuming staff and security and people all
Yeah,
came and started
yeah. I
helping.
think it was in the morning at an airport, so I think first responders who were there could get to me very quickly.
Okay. And then they took you to the hospital then?
Yeah, I'm assuming that they
Yeah, you don't really remember much of that, do you?
no. And I did spend some time thinking about had anything been different, had I been in the bathroom or on the plane or on a train, or and then it becomes Dr. Seuss in a box with a fox. All
Yeah.
of those, none of those scenarios play out well.
Yeah.
I remember Seth MacFarlane, who created the TV show Family Guy, was supposed to be on one of the flights on 9/11 that crashed into the Twin Towers.
Really?
Yeah, he had, I think he'd gone out drinking the night before, so he was hungover, and
Hmm.
his travel agent had given him the wrong information. So he
Okay.
was not on the plane.
Oh,
So
wow.
for a few months afterward, that was the question he would always get whenever he gave interviews. And I remember he said, I gave myself a few weeks to think about it, and then I put it away. And I thought, okay, that's good advice. I won't
Yeah.
go down the rabbit hole. So I was eventually able to, I think I had gotten another job as a tutor that
Mhm.
was going to be at a tutoring center because I thought while I may not be able to command a classroom, I could work one on one with someone.
Yeah.
And that was February of 2020. COVID hit in the next month
Yeah.
and my job was canceled.
Oh,
So I was based, no, I don't think at the time anyone knew if because it was a facility, it was like a tutoring center.
yeah.
So I was basically just going to be in my apartment. So my mother drove up and picked me up and brought me back to my parents' house. And that's really when I was able to do a lot of the emotional recovery
Okay.
because I was here at my parents' house. I didn't really have to worry about anything. I didn't have to go grocery shopping or do the day to day. So I could just focus on, okay, what am I going to do to help me make heads or tails of this?
Yeah.
And that's when I realized most of the time that I felt comforted was when I spoke to someone else who'd had a
Mhm.
brain injury and could assure me that what I was going through wasn't unique or it's not
Mm,
just you.
yes.
And that's when I thought, okay, maybe I should look into counseling or doing where I can provide that sense of relief to someone who's gone through what I've experienced.
Yeah,
Um,
I think there's something huge about that, right? You feel so isolated and alone when you're going through stuff like that. And it's so comforting to have somebody just validate your feelings and your experiences. And I don't know, it's amazing how much it helps to have a community around you that understands it.
Yeah, or even just I remember one of my favorite authors when I was in graduate school was a guy named David Foster Wallace. And I remember him saying once, good writing helps people feel less alone.
Mm,
And I remember thinking the worst part of this experience, or one of the worst parts of this experience, aside from the uncertainty of what the future might hold, was just feeling like I was going through everything without knowing, is this typical? Is this a problem? Should I contact someone about this? So
yeah.
just to hear from someone else that no, you may not remember your dreams as often.
Okay.
You may get a headache every so often. That was just helpful to understand, okay, I will have this problem, but this is a typical problem, it would seem.
So you've mentioned now the emotional disconnection, the headaches, as you just said. What other, not remembering your dreams? That's interesting too. You remembered your dreams before that? Because some people
Some,
just don't.
yeah, I did. I'm really, as I said before, I'm really fortunate. Even my limitations are very minor. My balance still isn't 100%. It's really difficult to articulate what it's like because I've never experienced anything like this before.
Yeah, sure.
My vision takes time to settle if I move my head laterally, which is very much similar to if you step off a moving merry-go-round,
Okay.
how that feels. That's basically the feeling.
Oh,
But I don't get nauseated. So
okay.
it's now just like my experience. So
Hmm.
if I make a 180-degree turn, I know I need to pause for a second before I move because I need to wait for the world to stop spinning,
Yeah.
which is again, in the grand scheme of things, I have a lot of friends who I've met in support groups who have had brain injuries that really leave them unable to work at 100%. They can only do something for a few hours a day. They can't really look at screens. I have a good friend of mine who would love to go back to work. He had been an accountant and just he can't. So now he has to live on disability and his wife takes care of him. And that's another part of the reason why I've been so gung ho about getting back into the career field. I felt like I owe it to myself. I've been given the second chance, but I also owe it to all of my friends who don't have the opportunity to make something. And this is not I going back to the emotional connections thing. I had always assumed that I would probably get married one day or at least be in a serious relationship with someone, probably have children. Now that's really difficult to wrap my head around
Mhm.
because it doesn't have the same passion isn't there anymore.
Interesting.
Yeah, I went I I had been in the online dating game before the aneurysm, and I went back because I thought this is what I had always wanted. It's
Sure.
so that was interesting because then a lot of the dates played out like episodes of Seinfeld. Like, when do you bring up that you had a ruptured brain aneurysm? Or when you do it, do you say, hey, would you like to split the nachos? By the way, I almost, so that was, and then I remember being out with a very attractive woman who was very funny. And I remember understanding, okay, this is if you run down the checklist of what you'd been looking for previously, she would check all the boxes. And
Okay.
yet sitting here with her is like watching a film about paint drying. Just in
Mhm.
terms of like my sex drive was gone. There was no desire to outside of the fact that we were having an interesting conversation. It just so having to reconcile, okay, that was going to be a huge part of your life
Hmm.
that doesn't seem to be important anymore. What's is there anything out there that could possibly fill that void? I've subsequently learned that yes, there is.
Okay.
But it took a while because I think we're all conditioned to understand that, okay, the brass ring, the goals in my life will include the following things that I've cultivated since I've grown up. I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this.
Yep.
There's an expectation that success for me will include the following things. And now I've realized that going back chronologically a little bit, so my mother was diagnosed with ALS officially in 2022. And in 2023, my father was having difficulty taking care of her by himself.
How old are they?
So she had been 76
Oh,
and he
yeah.
had just turned 80.
Okay.
So
Yeah, that's tough to take care of yourself sometimes at that age.
yeah.
That's, yeah, your body
So
starts breaking down.
I came down here to visit them over July 4th. And my father was telling me I'm really not. We had an aide who would come in the mornings, but then she would leave in the afternoon and he would take over. And I thought, okay, I'll move back in and become her primary caregiver, which is something I wouldn't have been able to do had I had my own family at the time.
Oh, yeah.
So I began to also see how, okay, you had wanted to be in a relationship or get married or have kids, but if that had happened, you wouldn't have been able to move back in so easily. So
Did
go
you
on, I'm
have
sorry.
to? You're good. Did you have to grieve that though? I know like for you, it's different because it was all of a sudden that passion for that wasn't there anymore. Did you still go through a bit of a grieving process
Oh
of
yeah.
not having
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. I didn't really begin to feel confident moving forward until about year three of my
Okay.
recovery. That's so the first year, the first 9 months was mostly physical, and then it was probably 2 years of emotional,
Mm.
making peace with certain things, realizing that uncertainty was okay. I didn't
Mm.
necessarily need to know the direction I was heading in.
So tough though, isn't it?
Oh my gosh, it still can be. I'm 6 years out now, and it still can, even though I'm comfortable with where everything is, there's still days where I wonder. I think that's just human to
Yeah.
question those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But and I began working with a somatic experience therapist
Yeah.
who could help me begin to make heads or tails of how to be comfortable just with where I am now. I've really been able to appreciate more of the subtle differences that I recognize in when I do feel emotions.
Okay.
And I have found other things that have been fulfilling. Like, I have a very good friend who I do this music review show with, and I have coffee with her virtually every morning before she goes off to work. And she's married and she lives in a different state. And I never would have thought I could have that quality of relationship with someone
Oh,
unless they were my spouse. So
okay.
there have been a lot. The aneurysm, while not pleasant, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone, allowed me to take a step back and reevaluate all of these things.
Sure. Are all of these things that you're experiencing, are they all supposed to get better, or is that still very up in the air?
I think I don't know. I don't know if my vision will ever fully come back. I don't know if my balance will come back. I certainly feel much more comfortable emotionally with where I am now, just in terms of my perspective.
Mhm.
And I don't know if I'll be able to make more solid emotional connections in the future,
Yeah.
but I also don't necessarily need for that to happen. There was
Yeah.
a point where I thought I can only feel comfortable if some of the familiarity comes back. And now I've accepted. So my mother unfortunately passed in September.
I'm
Um,
sorry.
thank you. But I also feel really gratified that I could give her a quality of life that she wouldn't have had, um,
Yeah.
had I not been here. And
Yeah.
now I'm still here. Help, my father's going to sell the house and move, so I'll stay here until he does that. But I'll also be able to start practicing on Monday because my job is a virtual, so
Nice.
I can do it remote. So a lot of pieces of the puzzle seem to fall into place naturally,
Ah,
and I feel like I've really felt comfortable in the last ever since year three. That was a turning point where now I feel like I wrote a book about the last few years called The Second Act,
okay.
which I'm blanking on his name right now. F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, he was misquoted once to say there are no second acts in American lives,
Mm.
which to me, I thought, okay, I have a second act. There, I think I calculated 1 out of 6 was the statistics I saw of someone who would be in my position where they have, not only do they survive, but they have very minimal debilitating limitations.
Yeah.
Yeah, my goal is to try and make the most out of this second act of just enjoying everything for what it is.
I love that. So you've written, well, so I'm assuming the second act is about your second act, then it's
Yes.
that story. And then you mentioned earlier that you wrote some crime fiction also.
Yeah, I had always wanted to be a fiction author. Originally, I wanted to be a screenwriter. That was the goal. I went to college and became a theater major because they didn't offer a film program. Um,
Okay.
and then eventually I went back to grad school for writing because I thought I needed the help. Plus, I was in finance at the time and the subprime mortgage crisis had just hit.
Mm.
My timing seems to be either really good or really awful.
No in between.
No, yeah. I went back to grad school and became basically a short story writer while I was there.
Okay.
And but I had always been a fan of crime fiction and hard-boiled detective novels. So I thought I'll try that. And there was a series of books about he's like a Sherlock Holmes character. He's very brilliant. His name is why can't I think of his name? I'm doing this again. Yeah, the author's Rex Stout, and his name is Nero Wolfe.
Okay.
So Nero Wolfe lives in a brownstone in Manhattan. I think the books probably started in the 20s.
Okay.
And he's this eccentric genius, and he has a partner named Archie Goodwin who does all the legwork.
Okay.
So Archie Goodwin will come back with all the clues, and then Nero Wolfe will call everyone to the house along with the police, and then he'll identify the murderer based on his. So I thought I'll use that formula, except my person who doesn't leave will always be in a diner. He'll just
Okay.
be eating pancakes and drinking coffee, and he'll have like a right hand person who'll go out and do all the legwork. And there was a book that had just come out that became a movie with Joaquin Phoenix. And I remember thinking that the author was more of a comedy writer, but he was taking a crack at crime fiction. So I read it and I thought, okay, I could try to do this too. So I wrote the book. It's called Pavement.
Okay.
And yeah, and then that came out. And then I had the aneurysm. So there are two things. I had the aneurysm, and then the book was released in 2019,
Okay.
and it came out and nothing changed in
Okay.
terms of not that I thought Conan O'Brien is going to call me to book me on his show, but I did think that it would open a lot more doors,
Yeah.
or that it would somehow become much more popular than it would. So that was another sort of, along with I'm not interested in a relationship anymore, and now
Mm.
my book that I thought was going to launch me into the stratosphere didn't. There was a lot of reconsidering, okay, how are we going to make heads or tails of any of this?
You were probably having a bit of an identity crisis at that time because then all of a
Yeah,
sudden, all the things you thought you were going to do with your life, you were taken away.
yeah, it was very difficult
Yeah.
in a short period of time.
Yeah.
And that's why it took a few years to begin to crawl out of the haze. But eventually, I thought to myself, you know what? Let me see if I can still do this again.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate enough that I came up with all of these personal experiences that I could use to write another fiction book.
Okay.
So like, for example, I have a younger brother, and sometimes when he would come visit me, he would send me a series of texts. I'm in front of the house, I'm in the lobby, I'm in the elevator, I'm on the first floor, I'm on the second floor, I'm on and my phone would just be like ding, ding,
I'm
ding.
totally that person. I'm 5 minutes away. I'm pulling up in the driveway. I'm ringing your doorbell.
So he got a lot. He enjoyed that. Was really funny for him.
Yeah.
And I thought, what if I have a character that I base on him
Yeah.
who will be Pinkerton detective in the 30s, and he'll send telegrams to someone he's looking for. So that the person will get a stack of 10 telegrams saying, I'm at the train station, I'm at the carriage booth, I'm on my horse, I'm riding to you. And then so I wrote what became a gold heist book during the Great Depression,
Okay.
where I based a character on my brother, one on myself, and then just thought of all these interesting characters that I could create without ever the intention of seeing if I could get it published. It was just, let me see if I could do this.
Okay.
And my brother's a doctor, so at the time he was telling me he was fascinated with rabies. I think there's only ever been one person who survived without getting medication.
Wow. Okay.
So I based the character of a bootlegger on someone who becomes a man of God because he survives getting bit by a wild dog. And so all of these people get together and they end up pulling off this gold heist. And so that book, I submitted it and it got published. And I thought, okay, I can still do this. So let's do it, but let's have it be something you can just enjoy doing
Yeah.
instead of focusing more on the end result of being published. Let's just have fun writing the story. So I'm still, fortunately, I found a great publisher. I'm still putting out work with them.
That's
It,
awesome. I think that's how a lot of stuff works out in life is if you don't have the expectations and you just do something you love, you end up putting something great out there.
Absolutely. That's what I've been able to find.
Yeah.
So these days, most of what I've been doing has been because I find it fulfilling to do, and I
Mm.
have the luxury of being able to do that still. So I'm still not 100% sure. Previously, I think before the aneurysm, there was a certain level of certainty, like this is the trajectory I'm on.
Yeah.
And I remember reading when I was in school for counseling, someone had suggested it's better to have a compass than a map.
Oh.
And that's how I now try to live my life because it's easier that way to know, okay, this is the direction I need to go in, but I don't need to stay on this trail. I can climb this wall or I can swim down this stream. And
That's we're very socially trained for that too, right? Like we're taught at a young age. That's what you do. You go to school, you go to college, you get a degree, you get a really good job, and then you get married and you buy a house and you have a family and then you do all that with your children. And it's like just a social structure that we've been taught since we were born. And it's really hard to change that in your mind when stuff like that happens and then it gets derailed and you're like, wait a minute, but I was supposed to do that because that's what everyone else is doing. That's what everyone else is telling me to do. And, but I think it's so good. I think we need to relinquish that expectation because everybody's living a different life. Everybody's having different experiences and marriage isn't for everybody. And there's so many things like that. Kids aren't for everybody and that should be okay.
yeah, I think I would imagine that it's starting to become more acceptable.
I
You
think
know,
so too.
also my generation growing up, our parents came from the generation of this is the brass ring.
Yeah.
You find one job, you work that job, it
Yeah.
becomes your career. You get the house and the 2.5 kids and the car and the dog and the yard.
Yeah.
Um, but I think now they've even begun adding new developmental stages into the lifespan. And I think having, first of all, not I think people are accepting not everyone should go to college, but
Yeah.
also people are accepting that okay, maybe you have 3 or 4 different careers before you find the one that you'd like to spend your time focusing on.
I think
So
it's absolutely ridiculous that we expect an 18, 17, 18-year-old to know what they want to do the rest of their lives. They've never even really had any life experience.
I do think that things are beginning to change,
Yeah.
which is I think there's much less rigidity to
And
everything.
and college is so expensive. I was
Or
just talking to a client of mine the other day, and she was telling me her daughter wants to go out of state for college to like California. And it's like, what did she tell me? One of the ones she wants to go to is like over 50 grand a year. I'm like, who can afford that? That's insane. And then the cost of living on top of that. It's just, I think that's probably a main factor in changing a lot of that because it's just so expensive to go to these big universities.
sure.
But I don't know. I hope it's changing because I didn't go to college. I went to beauty school. So.
Yeah, I think what was nice too about working with students who had ADHD is a
Yeah.
lot of them, we would provide opportunities for them if one of our students was really good at working with his hands or with taking devices apart or putting them together, there's an opportunity to become an electrician or to
Yeah.
go to technical school, which I think is now it's a much more readily accepted. So
Yeah.
hopefully we're heading in a better direction.
Yeah. And you definitely need degrees for certain things. If you're
Sure.
going to go be a lawyer, you got to go to law school. If you're going to be a doctor, you got to go to med school. But I think acknowledging that it's not for everyone and that's okay. And you're not going to be unsuccessful if you don't go to college for 4 years and get a degree in something. How many people do you know that went to college and don't even use their degree? I know a bunch of people like that too.
Sure. I have a theater degree, which
Mhm.
I guess I could find ways to draw back to some of the lessons I
Yeah.
learned, but for the most part, no, I think for me on a personal level, I'm much more comfortable now than I had been with blazing my own trail.
Yeah.
That's certainly directly a result of having been through what I've been through on a personal level, but also we all experienced COVID, which is the first worldwide pandemic I'm guessing most of us have had. Yeah, my 40s have been very strange. I had my aneurysm when I turned 40, COVID at 42. My mother was diagnosed at 44, and then she passed when I was 46. So 48, if aliens land and we make first contact, that's not going to be surprising.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been an interesting decade, a very eventful decade for you so far.
Yes. I also look at it, there have been some wonderful opportunities that have grown from these experiences, which is
Yeah.
strange to say because they've been mostly tragic, but
I know, but I've talked to a lot of people on this podcast about some really rough things that they've gone through in their lives. And almost everybody, again, like you said earlier with your aneurysm, not that you would wish that on anybody, not that you'd want to go through that again necessarily, but these things are so pivotal in our lives that they wouldn't change it. Most people wouldn't change what they've been through.
yeah, I'm a big believer in post-traumatic growth. Um,
Oh,
and that's something I've experienced myself, but I've also seen clients of mine when I was practicing my internship really, a lot of it I think is how you perceive what's happened. And if you can allow yourself a perspective that gives you the opportunity to make something from it, then
yeah.
but we'll see.
Yeah. You've got a clinical mental health counseling degree. So what is your future plans from here now?
So I was offered a position at my internship that I'm starting on Monday.
Okay.
It's a place called Lighthouse Therapeutic Services in Maryland. So
Okay.
I'm licensed to practice in Maryland, and I have just what's called an LGPC. So a graduate, it's like a provisional license. So I'll need to accumulate like 1,500 hours of counseling before I can be licensed to go independently.
Okay.
My goal is to eventually work with people who are recovering from some kind of either acquired or traumatic brain injury.
Yeah.
I think I have the experience now to also work with caregivers.
Yeah.
That I think that some sort of combination or those populations, but we'll see. A lot can change.
Yeah. You
But that,
may start this job and figure something else out that interests you more.
yeah, that's the other thing too, is I don't have any obligations at this point or anything that would preclude me from just following where it takes me. It's a great way to live life.
Yeah, yeah, it can be scary to get to that point and to relinquish that control because we want to control it. We want to have a say in it, but I think there's something very special in just relinquishing that control and allowing life to happen and
Sure.
see where it goes because it could take you in a very interesting direction. You just never know.
That is well said.
Would you have ever thought that you were going to be a counselor? You thought you were going to be a teacher, right? For forever.
Yeah, if there it would be too complicated to sit and think about everything I've done in the last couple of years and how that's manifested itself. All in hindsight, it all looks like a straight line.
Yeah.
Looking back, everything makes sense. But yeah, no, I would have no idea. 95% of the stuff I wouldn't even it wouldn't have even been on my radar 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. You've done some traveling, obviously, because you've taught abroad. Do you have any desire to do more of that too?
Now I haven't really thought so much about it.
Have you gone into an airport since then?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I've tried. Yes, I've. The first time back was a little surreal, just because I didn't even experience anything strange. It was just like, oh yeah, I'm back in an airport, and this was the scene of the crime not so long
So it
ago.
wasn't really triggering.
No, and now I travel not frequently, but enough that it's not anything crazy.
Yeah, that's good because I feel like that could be a scary thing to go back and do. And is there any risk for you flying after that?
No, no, I just get a CAT scan every few years,
Okay.
and so far everything looks fine.
Is it possible to happen again once it's happened once? Or
I think so,
that's
yeah.
so?
I don't exhibit any signs that it would happen again. I think it's certainly always possible. I don't think just because it's happened once, I don't think that raises the chances. What was really interesting is, so my the doctor who tells me to get the CAT scan, usually when I've spoken to him, he just tells me, it looks great. Everything has healed, you look fine. And then I sent it to the summary to my brother, and he said, would you like me to go through this with you? Has anyone ever explained what this means? And I,
Oh,
no. So he did. And he goes, all right, first, I want to reiterate you're okay, but you are missing parts of your brain.
wow.
And that was my response, because I guess the damage gets reabsorbed.
Okay.
So he said, yeah, you're missing parts of your cerebellum. And I just remember thinking, okay, this explains a lot. And
Yeah,
I
for
guess
sure.
it's kind of like with the eye patch. It's cool. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I did mention that when I was at the university, they're creating surveys to give people who've had brain injuries, and I'm
Okay.
just helping them with the language. And if there's anything I think is relevant, someone said, we've got 6 brains working on this, so we should be able to figure it out. And I was like, 5.5, if you want to get technical.
Oh, that's funny. Have you ever looked into what parts of your brain then? Obviously, that, like you said, it explains
Yeah,
a lot of those things, but
yes and no. I think within the last 20 years, we've learned about how like the plasticity. So things
Mhm.
rewire and reconnect. So
Yeah.
I don't know necessarily if it would really explain certain things. I remember being curious to look into, oh, okay, let's see if this is what maybe controls balance is messed
Yeah.
up, or but I have not done that yet.
Have
That at least
you
I remember.
have you read The Body Keeps the Score?
I did.
I mean that he goes in the beginning of that. I haven't finished it. It's such a heavy, dense book to read. It's taking me forever to get through it. But I know in the very beginning he goes like real deep into the parts of the brain that affect this and affect that and where your emotions come from and how you process everything. And so I just think something like that would be, if I was in your shoes, I think it would be really interesting to know where exactly in my brain that got affected and how that is continuing to affect you. You already know how it's affecting you, but
Yeah, I don't so much have the curiosity that I used to.
okay.
At this point, I've just accepted that this is what it. But yeah, it would be interesting to revisit that now.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. This has been a lovely conversation. What parting words do you have for my listeners? Anything you got?
I'll go back to an old favorite of mine. I Recovery of any kind happens in its own speed, in its own time, and frequently it looks like a spiral. So it's never, we always assume it'll be a straight line. And I used to think of the song Opposites Attract by Paula Abdul and MC Scat Cat. I take 2 steps forward, I take 2 steps back. We
Mm.
come together because opposites attract.
Oh, yeah.
It was the 2 steps forward and back that I would think of every time I thought, today I feel like I've lost all the progress I made yesterday.
Mm.
And then you
Yeah.
realize, no, you're still moving forward. It's a spiral.
Yeah. For anybody listening who is struggling, what were your number one things that helped you get through the emotional processing?
Having a good support system
Okay.
was helpful. And also recognizing that people would try to be helpful even if they weren't
Mhm.
being, and just recognizing that was still valuable.
Yeah.
I do remember talking to my godmother once and saying that, even I forgot what I said, but she said, "Oh, you're like a restored car. On the outside, you look fine, but on the inside, the engine still needs work."
Oh,
So I think that was really helpful because then I could use that analogy with everyone else.
yeah.
There were a lot of times where people would give me advice on, hey, this is what I think you should do. And me telling them, I just need someone to help me feel bad right now. Like,
Yeah.
this is not a problem I need solved. I remember during one of my grief classes, there was a video where someone was in a hole and the other person was above looking down, saying, "How can I help you?" And the way they ended up being able to help was, well, I can climb down in the hole with you and stay with you until you feel better, or we figure
Mm.
out what to do, instead of being like, hey, let me see if I can give you this ladder, or let me. So that's, make sure you have a support system of friends, family, support group, but also for the other side, recognize that people sometimes just need help being.
Yes. Yes. I know we all mean in those situations. Everybody just wants to help. Everybody has good intentions. But I have found myself in those situations before too, where people want to fix it, give you advice, and you're just like, you are not walking my path. Leave me alone. Like, I just want to be angry right now. I really do. And I think it's very important to feel those feelings. They always say don't stay in them, but like it is important for the processing to feel the feels.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Andrew, for coming on and sharing your story. I really appreciate it. You're super inspiring. So thank you for sharing all of that. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.